The first question is from a senior Russian economist associated with the Russian Academy of Sciences, who you know very well, Lynn. I should also mention that he is also someone who is very familiar with the U.S. framework and actually had served in a capacity here in the U.S. for many years. His question is, Lynn, many Russians don't trust the people that Obama is bringing in, for example, Hillary Clinton. Not because of things that happened during her husband's presidency, but because Hillary herself has been something of a hawk in the Senate. There is also concern about Gates as a holdover from the Bush administration. Also, there are many people in Russia who believe that the United States is behind the current crisis in Ukraine, and Ukraine's very hard line toward Russia. President Obama could make a major change by changing U.S. policy on putting the ABM facilities in the Czech Republic and Poland. What do you think about his doing that? Personally, I think it would be critical to addressing some of this nervousness about his new administration.
Well, I think the nervousness around the administration comes also from some other sources which are not U.S. sources or U.S. actions. For example, it's been obvious to me sometime that although I announced the imminent process of collapse of the international financial monetary system in July 25th of 2007, as of November 2008, leading institutions of the Russian government and others associated with them were not up to speed, had no recognition of the fact that this international crisis existed. And my question on this has been, what are the pernicious influences which are acting on Russia to misguide a number of notable Russian officials in making the mistakes they have made in understanding the United States in this period? Now, the problem in the United States, of course, has been, as I said before, in today's remarks just previously, the United States, from the time of the assassination of McKinley, which was an assassination intended to put the United States on the side of Britain in a war against Germany. The United States was dominated until the election of Roosevelt by fascist elements, or elements which are identified in the 1920s and 1930s and even 1940s as fascist, such as the Bush family. And that has been a problem. The failure to recognize the fact that there has been a recurring fascist element in the United States, as fascism is defined from the immediate post-World War I period. The same fascist element in our think tanks, which has been operating since Truman became president, and especially since the assassination of President Kennedy, which was a change in the situation. And don't assume that there was a lone assassin that killed President Kennedy. He may have been a moneylender, but that's the only kind of lone assassin he was. So the failure to take into account the reality of political realities of U.S. and international politics, to recognize in particular that what many people in Russia tend to blame on the United States is actually to be blamed, put at the door of the British Empire. And the softness on the British Empire is what I turn to when I suspect some of the foolish things that have been said from Russian circles recently in terms of Russia's failure, the Russian government's failure, like a suicidal act, to recognize the validity of the warning that I had given on the 25th of July, which they are aware of, and the Russians' failure to recognize the nature of the crisis even into December of 2008. I strongly suspect there's some dirty work among Russians and others coming from influences which are British or related, which have been responsible for much of this distrust of the United States I mean, we take into account that we know that Bush is no good. Bushes are no good. We need trees, not bushes. But take that into account. That is the problem. It's been the most crucial problem. And anyone who looks at Russian history and American history should understand differently. Now, there are many people who don't know that. But I think there are other problems inside Russia, because I certainly have done everything responsible as an American to warn Russia of what I saw the threats to them were. And I don't have any problem with George Soros' problem. The Russians know very well that George Soros is no good, even though he was close with Gorbachev for a while. Gorbachev, I think, has distanced himself somewhat from them. But the biggest drug pusher in the world, the worst fascist in the world, is probably George Soros, personally. And if you have George Soros around, what do you expect? Who ran the operation in Georgia? That was George Soros and Company on behalf of the British Empire. And therefore, when Russians doubt that the British Empire is our enemy, I think someone in Russia is being very foolish. And that's the problem. Now, Hillary Clinton, that's not a real problem. That's a cheap excuse. Hillary was functioning as an ambitious political leader in the U.S. Senate. Her husband was a person who adapted to things. Not always, and I didn't always approve it, and I said so. And Bill knew it very well. Bill knew it well, and Hillary knew it well. But Hillary's behavior on this kind of thing is not really that significant. It's not the cause. That's the frictional aspect of parliamentary types of politics. And, Russians should know me by now well enough to know that when in doubt about U.S. policy, what I think it means, they should ask me. I help to clear their heads a little bit. Listen to me a little bit more, and they won't make these kinds of mistakes anymore. Yeah, we have a common enemy. Russia as a nation and I have a common enemy. It's the British. And when they lose sight of that, they're in trouble. When we get them between us, when I and the Russians get this British between us, we can do something about this thing. So they shouldn't break the alliance with me. That's the way to look at it. I don't think you have to worry much about this problem as such, as stated in the question. I think right now, Hillary will probably be going into Russia. I don't know what the facts of the matter are, but I would suspect very soon. I think her primary orientation will be to deal with this, probably Syria, because we're trying to salvage the very dangerous mess in Southwest Asia, with the Israelis falling into this crazy thing of this recent attack. You were on the verge of an agreement with Israel. I mean, the Israelis only had to sign the papers. They had agreed to everything with Syria. If they had signed the papers instead of going into this crazy war against Gaza, forget Gaza, it's the Muslim Brotherhood, so what? Blame the Saudis if you don't like that. If they'd signed the papers with Syria, the signature on the agreement with Lebanon would have occurred. If the agreement with Israel and Syria and Lebanon had occurred, then suddenly the whole Palestinian question now becomes on the table in a positive way. Because the purpose of this negotiation is to kill Sykes-Picot. Rip up the Sykes-Picot, which the French-British alliance created as the occupation of the Southwest Asia in the period of World War I. That's where the problem comes from. You want to talk about the bloody Middle East, the bloody Arab area? Sykes-Picot, who, for example, 9/11. What about the Saudi involvement in 9/11? You think that was some loose cannon? Or was this an operation against the United States to try to change the United States politically? Was this a terrorist act intended to manipulate us, which seemed to succeed? It made a national figure out of a dummy called George W. Bush Jr. The guy couldn't even read a thing about it. My goat, my pet goat. He was sitting down there. We have to grow up on this thing. The vital interest, the existential interest of Russia now at this time, in the crisis, which is a very severe one, which hit it, and for which it was caught by surprise. The Russian government was caught by surprise. Don't blame me for that. I warned it. They didn't believe me. They believed somebody else. They should get rid of that somebody else. But under these conditions, we have to get this thing going. We have to get this collaboration between the United States, among the United States, Russia, China, and India now. If we get that collaboration, we can get control of the planetary situation. If we don't do that, I don't know if we can control it. And if we can't control it, I don't know if you want to live on this planet.